Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to your final session of the day. You are going to be hearing from Laurie Cestnick in just a few minutes, and I wanted to take some time to just introduce her properly to you guys. Dr. Cestnick is a neuroscientist who has been conducting clinical work and research for over 10 years, both in the States and in Australia, which is pretty exciting. She joined Weaver Center, formerly Weaver Clinic, in October 2005 and conducts comprehensive evaluations as well as individual and group therapy sessions. She's also done a lot of work with Mass General Hospital using the latest technologies in brain imaging and scanning to sort of conduct her research. So welcome, Dr. Cestnick. Can you take it? Thank you.
Is this working yet? Is this working? Hello? You got it working yet? There you go. It's on now. Okay, perfect. Okay, hi everybody. Since I'm the last one, is this a little too loud or is this okay? Okay. Since I'm the last one, I think it would be nice to encourage questions as we go, if you have them. So feel free to shout out or use the mic over there because I think it'll roll a little better that way. And, you know, I'm glad we're the last ones that we can actually do that. Otherwise, I'd be rushing through this thing like you wouldn't believe to get it done. I've got a lot of information because I find it really interesting. You may or may not find it all interesting, but I want to try to get out as much as we can today, so I will try to roll along. But please ask questions if you want to. Even just stand up or go to the mic. Okay? All right. So today we're going to talk about how do we read, what goes wrong when we can't, and how do we fix the problem. This is kind of loaded, isn't it? There's a lot of ways we can approach reading, a lot of them. Today we're going to talk about something very different and also that I think is very prevalent in reading and dyslexia. So I hope you get a lot out of it today. So how do we read? Just to sort of bring it back to reality here, what we can all sort of relate to is when you look at the page, you're an adult, you know, we read, we know how to read. You go and you look to the page. If you recognize the word, you get the meaning from it, right? If you don't recognize the word, what happens is you go to the left of that word and you start to sound it out, right? You start applying the sounding out rules. We can all sort of relate to that, right? That's pretty much what happens. Sounds really simple. That is what happens. We call that dual root theory. What happens is, we don't really need the word theory to figure that out. But you look at it, if you get it, so it's a visual representation of that word. If you see it and you get it and there's that visual representation, it goes straight to meaning in your brain. So it goes from what it looks like to what it means. If you don't get it, unfortunately, it doesn't go from what it looks like to what it means, does it? So you sound it out. We call this the indirect route to reading. You have to look at it, then you have to take it apart into little pieces. You put the sound units to it. You say it in your head or out loud, and you're like, oh yeah, I've heard that word before. Now I do know that word, or I don't know that word. Those are two different ways to read. You read holistically, or you read via sounding out. Teachers can relate to this because they teach whole word versus phonics, that kind of thing. So that's how it works initially when we first look to a word in a person that can read. That's what you do, right? So you look at the whole word. If you don't get it, you go to the left and you read it, you sound it out. We know you go to the left. If anybody wants any documentation or for me to emphasize where studies come from and where the information comes from, feel free to ask me. That's a whole other camp on its own, but we know that when you can't read a word, you go to the left and you start reading it that way, sounding it out left to right. We know that there are different paths in the brain responsible for these different things. One example is in Japanese, kanji versus kana. So here you have a logo for kanji, one logo that means one word, right? So that word means stop. So there's a little picture of a little guy next to it showing that means, you know, how that means stop. Whereas conversely, right beside it, there's another symbol. That means ya, as in Yahoo. So you would have to combine several of these logos to get a word. Just like in the English language, right? When you go to read a word like yacht that you can't sound out, right? You can't sound out yacht. If you did, you'd say yacht or yacht or something, right? So to say a word like yacht, you have to know what all those letters look like. It has to be one unit to say yacht. Otherwise, you're going to say it wrong. That's just like the kanji, one unit. Other words, like fake words, like borp or bleener, you know, obviously you don't have a memory of those. They're fake. So you have to sound those ones out, right? That would be like the kana. So even in the English language and other languages, Italian, German, French, we study reading and dyslexia in every country in every conceivable way, and all of these countries and all of the information share, we know we read these two ways. Okay? You can have brain damage and lose the ability to read one way and maintain the ability to read another. That's a good thing. if you have a language that does both of those things. If you don't, you might be in a little trouble. But we can read both of these ways. This slide denotes a lot of words that are used by people in science all over the place. All the words on the left denote that direct route to meaning. You look at it, you see it, you try to understand, you recognize that word or you don't recognize that word. All the words on the left here are denoting that direct route from print to meaning. All the words on the right are denoting that sounding out route. A lot of the words you can see, they're different words, but everyone's studying the same thing. And I just wanted to present these words to you and talk a little bit about them so that when you read the research, you know everyone's really talking about the same thing. There's just these two ways of reading, okay? So I've been using the words direct and indirect. Direct means it goes directly from print to meaning. Indirect means it goes from print, you don't recognize it, what's that? Okay, now I got to sound it out. So it goes from print to sounding out to meaning, right? So the one on the right, there's a phonological code involved. The one on the left, there's not, okay? There's also the words lexical versus non-lexical. Some scientists choose to use those words. What that implies is lexical is like a lookup strategy. If you recognize the word, you've got a memory for it in your brain. So it's like a lexicon or a lexical lookup. If you've never seen it before, it's called non-lexical. There's no picture there. There's no that's referred as non-lexical. Kanji versus kana we've talked about. Logographic versus piecemeal, I think you can relate to that one. Logographic meaning one symbol for one meaning. Or yacht being one group of words for one meaning. Piecemeal, you have to sound it out because you don't get it. Irregular words and non-words. This is important to talk about. A lot of the English studies use these words. An irregular word is a word like yacht. Okay? It's irregular because it doesn't follow the regular sounding out rules. If it did, you'd say yacht or something like that. It's irregular. Other irregular words would be pint, right? P-I-N-T. It's not pint, it's pint. That's irregular. Or blood. If we followed the rules, we'd say blood, right? Meringue, E-Y-E. These are all irregular words. They don't follow the regular sounding out rules. And what's neat about using those kinds of words is if you can't do those kinds of words, it means you're not able to really see all those letters as a whole unit to get a visual memory of it. So those words also fall under the camp of this whole word sight reading. On the other flip side, regularization, a word like table, it's always table. It would never be table. There are rules to read table. They're regular rules. That's why we use the word regularization for that other way of reading. Some people choose to use the words familiar versus unfamiliar. If you're familiar with the word, chances are you're going to look at it, and it's going to be the direct route. You look at it, hey, I've seen that before, this is what it means. If you're not familiar with it, you have to apply the sounding out rules because you don't know what that word is, right? Other ways to talk about it, some people say in parallel versus left to right. When you're reading irregular words or through the direct route from print to meaning, you're processing all of those letters pretty much in parallel. You have to know what all those letters are to know what the word is. Versus if you come up with a word you don't know, you're doing it left to right. You don't get that word. I've never seen that before. You start sounding it out left to right. So that's what's happening different visually. And finally, you'll hear words like surface versus phonological dyslexia. Surface implies, well, you can't read the direct route. The word derived originally from acquired brain injury studies where they would call deep versus surface dyslexia. So some people, they'll get an acquired brain injury and they don't know what a word means, whereas other people won't recognize what those letters mean. They're a little different, but that's where it derived from, even though we use it when we talk about children with no history of brain damage. But surface basically implies, like the list that it's in there, that you can't read the direct way. So surface dyslexics can't read words like yacht or meringue. They sound everything out. They're sounder-outers because that's their mode, but they can't read that direct way. Versus phonological dyslexia. This is important. Phonological dyslexia, we like to think of as the predominant form of dyslexia today. Most people do, and there's probably a lot of teachers in the room, and I think most people would presume that most kids that have reading problems have deficits of phonology. And I'm here to sort of tell a different camp. I don't necessarily believe that, and that's why I think it's important to talk about this today. But when kids have poor non-word reading, right, so we presume, okay, if you can read regular words okay, like table and maybe your name, and if you can read all those words fine, but you can't read fake words, the sounding out, what you sound out, obviously you have a sounding out problem. So obviously you're either, maybe you don't hear the sounds right, maybe you don't have good, what they call phonemic awareness, maybe, a lot of things, but people think, oh, you can't read non-words, you must have a problem in phonology. Makes sense, right? Why would you have a deficit of vision if you can read a word like table, but you can't read a word like bork? Why would that be a visual deficit? That's confusing to think, right? Well, what I'm going to talk about today is I actually think there's a visual deficit as to why you can't read book, but you can read table. And that's why I think it's important. And the prevalence of this. So I just skipped, we already talked about this slide, but we'll talk about, so if non-word reading is poor, we presume they have a phonological deficit. That you can't sound it out, you must have a sounding out problem. But it is the case that there are many, 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 many people that cannot read non-words, but their phonology is fine. And the question today is why? The answer is there's a deficit of what we call visual attention. And I'm going to explain what this is, and I'm going to give you tons of examples. I'm going to give you examples of acquired brain injuries in children and adults. I'm going to give you examples of developmental populations, dyslexics, ADHD, pervasive developmental disorders. I'm even going to show you that we can induce this in you. I can give you a visual attention deficit, and I can predict what your reading errors are going to be by giving it to you. So, poor non-word reading in the presence of good phonological skill is in both acquired dyslexics, so from a brain injury in both adults and children, and developmental dyslexics in both adults and children. First, we're going to talk about these populations, okay? And just before we get going on this, I want to explain what visual attention is. And for the purposes of this talk, I just want you to think, you know what? Visual attention is wherever I look. It's wherever I fixate, okay? It's really a little bit more than that. It's where what you're consciously aware of. But I just want you to think, when I say visual attention, it's where you're looking. Okay? So, where you look doesn't mean you're going to be aware of that thing. You can look somewhere and not be really too aware of that thing. But what I'm going to talk about now is how visual attention likely works in normal people, in all of us, and what probably goes wrong when it doesn't work so well, and how that impacts our reading. Has anyone ever heard of hemifield neglect? Nobody. 1, 2, 3. Okay, we got this good. Okay, let me show you some pictures here. First, I'm going to tell you the theory of how I think this works, and then we'll talk about hemifield neglect. This is a bit of a stab. It's a bit of a guess. It's not proven, but I'm going to throw it out there, and I'm going to tell you, and then you can decide it by yourself at the end if you think it's legitimate or not. So everybody look up at that word visual. When you look at that word visual, you're looking right at the center of the word, slightly to the right of it. That we already know. What happens when you look at that word? A couple things. The V and the I are processed by your right hemisphere, and the A and the L are processed by your left hemisphere. And where you're fixating is processed bilaterally on both sides. Some people think that that's not the case. Okay? Some people think that they'd say, no, Laurie, that's not true. What's more true is whatever's on your retina, whatever's in your fovea, right where you fixate, that's processed bilaterally. And whatever's in the periphery of your retina, that's processed, what we call contralaterally, by opposite sides of the hemisphere. But that's not the case, because when you take, I'm going to explain it in a little bit, but acquired brain injury cases of people, I'm stepping ahead of myself here a little bit, but even your memories of things, it doesn't have to be what's projecting onto your retina, but you can neglect the left or right of your memories of things based upon acquired brain damage. It has nothing to do with what's on your retina. And you'll see from many, many studies, we're talking today why that's the case. But if that's the way it works, right, you look to the center of the word, the middle's processed by both hemispheres, because it's in the fovea, it's bilaterally. Peripheral is processed by opposite sides of the hemisphere. So let's take non-word reading then, right? Non-word reading is read left to right. So, if you can't read a non-word, but your phonology is absolutely fine, it's possible there may be something going on in your right hemisphere that's not allowing you to see the left so well. It's a possibility. But what I'm going to talk about now is I'll show you how this all works. Okay, this is called contralateral processing, which I already mentioned. Contralateral means the opposite side. So in this picture, you can see a little blue on the brain there. This is an example of a stroke. Let's say someone has a stroke in that area of their brain and it disrupts their ability to see the left side. You see that? It actually doesn't disrupt the ability to see the left side, but they're not attending to it. I'll get to that a little later. But you see, the right side is very salient because the left side of the brain is fine. So they're getting a very clear image of what's on the right. So this is what I propose. Right hemisphere damage leads to left, what we call left neglect. When you get damage in your right hemisphere, sometimes you lose the ability to attend to things on the left. And I'm going to show you all kinds of case studies to demonstrate that. It's not just an acquired, though. It's not just from a brain injury. It's developmental, too, and also in you and I. So we'll talk about that. Left hemisphere damage, the opposite would be true. You might start neglecting the right side of space. But what would happen if you damage both sides? Well, what we're going to show through some brain injury studies and other things is those people tend to see only one object at a time, or one letter at a time. Okay, so to start, when we're talking about these acquired case studies, we're going to be talking about, I'm going to demonstrate some cases of what we call hemispatial neglect, so this phenomena, acquired brain injuries in adults and children. Then I'm going to show reading disorders from brain injuries. We're going to focus on the reading disorders because there's no theory of neglect associated with them, but I'm going to show you deficits because there are very few neglect studies that also talk about reading. So what I'm going to be doing in a second is I'm going to be talking about acquired brain injuries that led to reading disorders and how this theory might fit as to why they have those reading disorders. Lastly, I'm going to talk about what's called simultaneous nausea, which are people that get damage on both sides and what their reading looks like. Okay, for decades and decades, this is the way it's been. We think, okay, you get a deficit to my right hemisphere, my parietal lobe, I get a deficit of, I get hemifield neglect. For years we've been studying this. We know you get right there in that red region. If I get a deficit there on my right side of my brain, right there, I'm not going to see very well on the left side of space. This is the predominant idea about what neglect is. By the end of this talk, you're going to feel very differently about what neglect is. But that's been the long-standing idea. Here is an example of a gentleman with a right hemisphere stroke who shaved the left side of his face but did not shave shaved the right side of his face but did not shave the left side of his face. That's because he wasn't attending to the left. So the stroke in the right made him neglect the left side of his face. Here's a really extreme example of the most profound form of neglect, which is actually very sad and quite scary. But in about 1 or 2% of people with neglect, maybe a little more, people actually don't recognize themselves in the mirror. That's pretty scary. When you take your face and you divide it in half and you take mirror images of each half, you'll find that we're not really symmetrical. We're not entirely symmetrical. Some people's faces, the different sides are very different, right? And for those people, when the sides of the face are very different, they look in the mirror, they don't even recognize themselves. So that's kind of scary. But there's an example of an extreme form of neglect. I want to talk about how prevalent neglect is because I want everyone to sort of get the idea or sense of how this can really happen to a lot of us. Of 166 patients with right hemisphere stroke, now this is anywhere, this isn't parietal lobe stroke. This is anywhere in the right hemisphere. 166 people that had right hemisphere strokes, 50% of them, almost, 48%, have neglect. That's a lot. It's a lot of people. That's half. And the interesting thing is the tests that they use to pick up on neglect, they're very, 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 very stringent. If I were to give them other types of tests that are much more lenient and pick up on neglect much more quickly, this number would raise much, much, much higher. But as you can see, almost half of people with right hemisphere strokes neglect the left side. There's other information there too, like about 17%, they'll lose control of their motor functions. They might have, their arm might be weak or their leg might be weak. 21% have what's called perceptual neglect, which is not recognizing objects. So an example is if they were to look at a picture of a polar bear and they were to see a polar bear's head in their right hemifield, which is working just fine, they could pretty much guess, you know what, that's going to be a polar bear because his bum's probably going to fit the front, right? But if you give them something like an abstract design and you say, what's this? They're not going to really know so much what that is. So depending on the type of task that you give them, these numbers will go up or down. And most of the tasks that they give are very, very stringent tasks that it's hard to pick up on neglect. But anyway, so about 27% have the parapersonal neglect where they're shaving, an example is not shaving on one side of their face, or the personal neglect, which is the worst. I put a little funny in here. Oh, yeah, go ahead.
Quick question. How soon after the stroke were they given the test?
That's a good question. I honestly don't remember, but I could tell you by a guess because I work with these types of patients. It doesn't really matter. The neglect doesn't really... The visual neglect doesn't go away as quickly as the motor neglect, but the neglect is pretty quick. It's almost immediate. You can get the function back. Like you can gain function of your walk. You can walk again. You can read again when you couldn't read. And what it takes is, we're on autopilot when we have a stroke. So it's just getting out of that autopilot. The brain's a muscle, you got to work it. But it's going to be different for everybody depending on how hard they work at it. But it's not, as we'll see towards the end, it's not insurmountable. You're not stuck with neglect forever. Some forms are harder to get rid of than others. But that's a good question. And you know what? In this particular one, I didn't even document who said it. But, okay. Here's an example of hemispatial neglect. So on one side, you've got all these big, bulky guys, and the other side, these little scrawny guys, and the saying is, I've got it too, Omar, a strange feeling like we've just been going in circles. So an example of neglect there on the left. So the talk is not so dry. That's about it. Okay, this is the thing we're going to talk about, this is the most common form of neglect ever, which is what we've always, this is how we talk about neglect. You get right hemisphere damage, it leaves the neglect of the left. That's been the predominant literature. I'm not going to talk about it a lot because it's so heavy out there. There's so much of it. It's indisputable, but I'm just going to give you some examples. Okay, so first of all, we've always presumed that damage to the right parietal lobe leads to hemifield neglect of the left side of space. But it doesn't matter if it's the parietal lobe or not. You can get neglect of the left if it's in the frontal lobe, parietal lobe, superior temporal gyrus, occipital lobe, or basal ganglia, which is kind of way down here. It doesn't really matter where the damage is. That's the interesting fact. It matters more whether it's the left or the right. I mean, sometimes, because you saw the stats, sometimes you can have brain damage, you don't get the neglect. But it's not really clear as to why, because it doesn't really tend to matter on where it is, which makes me think it's more a result of timing as opposed to the place. Does that make sense? So if the right hemisphere is slow for whatever reason at processing the left, right, and the left hemisphere is more quick at processing the right, conscious attention is going to go to the part that was processed more quickly. So neglect has a facet of time to it. And we're going to see this as we talk too, the studies that have been done. You can make neglect come or go based upon how quickly you present things. That type of thing. Timing is important. These are the old ways, and we still use them today, I don't want to say old, but these are the ways that we've been determining whether someone has neglect or not. Draw me a clock. Copy this clock, or draw it. Draw me a flower, or copy this flower. And what you see is they tend to neglect the left. So we see examples of, they left out the numbers on the left side of the clock, they left out the wall on the left side of the house, that kind of thing. The eye is missing on the left side of the face. This is obvious neglect. It's so obvious. The thing is, the problem with this type of study, the way it works is, if you look at the clock, it's first of all sitting in front of you so you can copy it. So you can move your eyes all over the place, you can have a look at this clock. If you're looking right in the middle of the clock, you're going to neglect the left of it. If you decide to look at the number 9, you're going to be neglecting the white space on the left, and now all of a sudden the left of the clock is in your right space. Now you can see it. That's why these aren't so good. These aren't really good ways of determining whether someone has neglect or not. But we do still use them. And we'll talk about ways that are better. But it's not just in adults, it's in children too. It's children with acquired brain injuries. There aren't a lot of them. Certainly aren't a lot of neglect studies on children with acquired brain injuries, but there are a few that we could pull from. Examples are, you get a cork board, you put toys on it, and you say, hey, take down the cars for me, or take down the bears for me, and you watch how they do it. Sometimes they'll only take them off on the right, sometimes they'll only take them off on the left, or there's an order to which they'll take them off, which is right to left to right. You sort of watch that type of thing. The results were toddlers with left hemisphere and right hemisphere damage moved objects from the side ipsilateral to the lesion first and contralateral last, which basically just means there was neglect, and they removed the objects first from the side that wasn't neglected. So if you have right hemisphere damage, you're neglecting the left, they're going to remove them right to left. So there you go. Here's another example of a type of task. Cross out all the bears as an example. Cross out all the bears, you watch how they cross them out. Count the bear, in B, count the bears for me. You watch, well, do they do it left to right? Do they do it right to left? This type of thing. 3 out of 10 right hemisphere children had the significant kind of neglect, with the clock drawings and that kind of thing. But 8 out of 10, that's 80%, skewed to the right and worked right to left. 80% of them, which is showing sort of a dominance for one area over the other. This is what we know. This is what we've been talking about for decades, about neglect. It's acquired. It's due to right hemisphere brain damage. It's due to parietal lobe damage. and it's a spatial deficit. What we're going to talk about today, it's not just acquired, it's in developmental populations, and we can make it happen in you and me. It's not just due to right hemisphere damage, it's also due to left hemisphere damage. You get left hemisphere damage and you neglect the right side of space. People don't talk about that as much. It's not just due to the parietal lobe. You can get damage almost anywhere in the hemisphere and you get something funky like this. And it's not just a spatial deficit. Timing is important. When you look at a clock, you've got a lot of time to get over that neglect. If you present that clock really quickly, that's different. Timing is important. You can make neglect stay or go away based upon the speed in which you present things. This is an interesting little fact I'm just throwing in here because I think it's kind of important. And they found basically from studies all over the world that younger children up until maybe 6 to 8 have a little bit of a right bias. They tend a little bit toward the right side of space. And then it tends to go away as they get older. It's not just from experience. You wonder that, okay, well, we write left to right, we read left to right, so we kind of move from a little bit to the right to a little bit to the left because experience. But it happens in Hebrew people too that read right to left. There's still a dominance from one side or the other. So when kids are flipping things around, you're seeing all these perceptual problems when they're younger, B's and D's, all that, don't worry about it. It usually goes away after a little while. Anyway, okay, so we know there's neglect, right? There's neglect in these acquired populations. How does this impact their reading? This is kind of trippy, what I'm going to tell you. This is the way it goes in adults with acquired brain injuries and probably children too. If I were to take someone with a stroke that has neglect and I give them a word, and I say, is this real or is this fake? They've got neglect, remember. They'll be able to tell me for the most part. How weird is that? No, that's called lexical decision. They can tell me whether that's real or fake. But then I'll say, well, how many letters do you think are in this word? They'll probably get that right too, or close to it. Kind of bizarre if they can't see the left. But then what happens is, I'll do things like, okay, read this word aloud, or read this fake word to me. Once it comes to reading aloud or reading a fake word, most people, if they don't recognize the word, especially a non-word, they've got to go to the left. Now it's a problem. They can't read non-words because they can't shift their attention way over to the left to start sounding it out. Most people with right hemisphere stroke and neglect can't read non-words. They can read real words pretty well because you can guess, right? Just like the polar bear, you can guess the back of him looks pretty much like the front of him. If you see a word like table and you see A-B-L-E, that could be table or cable. You can guess. You can try to figure that out. So that's what, sometimes they'll get the meaning of the word too because they can guess. Well, it might be table, it might be cable. Yeah, I think I know what that means. But when it comes to actually reading it out loud, now you have to go to the left, you have to start sounding it out. That's a problem. So passage reading is also a problem because you have to know how to shift your attention all over the place. So what becomes most impaired in people with right hemisphere stroke and neglect? Reading non-words, reading it loud, and passage reading. But the interesting thing about what, they can recognize words still, that's kind of interesting because what it's telling us is that there's a visual representation at the back of the brain and they can tell, oh yeah, I've seen that before, or I haven't seen that before. But their conscious attention is different. Visual attention is where am I consciously going to attend to now? And they can't consciously shift to the left because they're on autopilot and they're not shifting. Okay. Is this in children too? Developmental dyslexics? Yeah, it's in developmental dyslexics. It's in people with ADHD. Possibly in people with pervasive developmental disorders like autism or Asperger's. We'll talk about that. And yes, it can also be in you and I at times. So there are conflicting studies. Some studies show yes, some studies show no. And it just depends upon the task that they used. So the cancellation tasks, right, crossing out the teddy bears or drawing the clocks, findings are mixed. Yeah? Oh, I'm sorry.
Could you put the last slide in?
Yeah.
Just for a second.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Yep. Sorry.
Thank you.
Yep. So these are the populations that we've looked at. There could be much more, but these are the ones we've looked at. Okay? So the cancellation of the clock drawing tasks, they're a lot easier to do, right? Because you can move your eyes around to try to figure things out. So you're going to be neglecting different parts of the clock at different times. So you're not going to find so much neglect in those as you would, say, from a task where you, computer-generated task, where you throw, let's say, 2 lights on, or on the computer. You see a circle here, and you see a circle there, and you're asked, which side do you see the circle? Or press a button for every time you see a circle on the screen, press a button. Some are in the right, some are on the left, and you can adjust the speed in which you put these circles on the screen. Those types of things, we call them bilateral with rapid presentation. Both sides, quickly, really good at picking up on neglect. They can't move their fixation around. You're just getting this really raw, natural thing, which is what reading is. It's that quick. Reading's quick. You look at it, you make a decision. So you get to see a lot of really interesting reading errors from people with neglect. There are children, non-word reading is one. Obviously, you can't move to the left. Non-word reading is going to be hard. When your phonology is fine, there's a good chance that children might be doing something like this. But you find other weird things going on, like they're leaving out the ends of words and things when there could be a left hemisphere damage impacting the far right of words, this kind of thing. This I was really happy to see. This just came out last month on the internet, and it's going to be developed in print next month. So we're really lucky to have this for the talk today. This was a temporal order judgment task. So, just like I said, a bilateral rapid presentation task, you can present things in both fields of vision, right? Left and right. And you have people respond by, hey, what do you see? Press the button for the order in which you saw these circles, that kind of thing. Basically what they found was when a rightward attentional bias is present, okay, when you're over on the right a lot, these are the people that have very impaired non-word reading, and they don't have a phonological deficit. So I thought that was really, really interesting. Yeah?
Base where they actually have really good solid skills and sight word or word recognition. If it's impaired non-word reading, because I've seen cases that isn't impaired here, and they're like, oh, that's just a flaw of the task. They usually use dibbles.
Yeah, not familiar. Actually, Andrew's familiar with dibbles. She might be able to comment on that later. But yeah, the tricky thing with the little ones is there's always a little bit of a bias to the right anyway, so you're not sure if that's natural or not. And their word recognition isn't, if it's great, then that'd be perfect. I mean, I'd love to test a child that's really young that has great word recognition, because you can look at the developmental pieces of that. But usually, they're not so familiar with these things to make it so automatic that they're looking around a lot and still kind of trying to figure it out. I mean, it's a little harder, is all, when they're younger.
But if you see a kid who does have actually strong whole word recognition and their ability to decode non-words is significantly impaired.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely be concerned about that. Especially if they're being taught phonics in school. If that's what they're being taught and they're not getting it, then I'd say, and phonology is fine. So you want to look at the phonological skills first off. We don't want to just look at reading measures. We want to look at get a neuropsych done, get a neuropsychological evaluation done. What does the intelligence look like? What are the visual spatial skills like? What's attention like? If phonology is okay and there's that gap like that, I'd be all over visual attention on that one. Yeah. I love case studies too. If you have interesting children or adults with, it's nice to tell a scientist because we learn from those cases. We really do. We learn from those things. This is funny. This study is kind of funny. The reason it's funny is this was one of my thesis examiners back in the day. I think my thesis went out around the millennium sometime. This is John Stein. He's an eye guy, Oxford Eye Lab in the UK. Doesn't believe that there's a basis for neglect in reading. He dissed my thesis entirely. Laurie, there's no neglect in reading. And he did this study I was really happy to see in 2006 showing neglect in some developmental dyslexics, which is kind of neat. And this is these types of tasks are the hard ones to find neglect on. So that was nice to see. But there's an example. I might go ahead and show these slides. I was going to skip through a whole bunch because I didn't want to go over, but this woman, Rita Hari, she is in Finland, and she did a study on adult dyslexics, and again, she found left neglect in adult dyslexics through this line motion illusion task. So I'm going to show you some slides. I want you to tell me which way you think the line is growing, from the left or from the right. Are you ready? Okay, you want another one? Oh, there you saw the trick. One more. Oh, I'm screwing this up. Okay, here we go. Try again. Left. Forget it. But you get the idea, right? I'm going to go and I'm going to skip through all these, even though they're very interesting. I'm going to skip a lot because I want us to have time for questions and to talk about things. But there's a lot of evidence for left hemisphere deficits, both in acquired and developmental, and the amount of evidence now is very, very, very high, so I don't want to waste our time talking about it. You'll find it all over the literature. Pervasive developmental disorders, let me just, actually we'll get to that, but take my word for it. What's more controversial is neglect of the right side of space due to left hemisphere damage. People haven't liked that idea, so we're going to talk a little bit about that. Can you get right hemispatial neglect from left hemisphere damage? Yes. Back in the day, we used to think the right hemisphere was the artsy brain, right? And the left hemisphere is the language brain. Oh, I'm the logical thinker. I'm the left brainer. Oh, I'm the artsy one. I'm the musical one. I'm the right brainer, right? That stuff is no. It's not a lot to that. So, but we used to think that way. Oh, the visual is the gestalt. It's the whole. Left hemisphere is dominant language, it's true, but visually they're represented pretty equally in both sides. Here's another, we talked about this cancellation task, but this is now the same task given to people with left hemisphere damage, children with left hemisphere damage. Same thing happened. The kids with the right hemisphere damage showed neglect of the left by by canceling things right to left, right? And the kids with the left hemisphere damage showed right space neglect by canceling things left to right, going from the good space that you see more quickly to the lesser space. Didn't really matter, just sort of like that. Oh, by the way, 2 of them had severe neglect from the left hemisphere damage, severe neglect of the right. But most of the 15 showed that dominance of performing left to right. Again, damage in the left hemisphere doesn't really matter so much where it is. Frontal, parietal, temporal, occipital, that's from front to back. A lot of these cases, you still end up with neglect of the right. What reading deficits would come from this? What reading deficit would come from a left hemisphere damage? Anyone want to take a stab? If you had damage to your left hemisphere, what would your reading look like? On the right side, yeah, exactly, on the rightmost side. Well, yeah. So there's not a lot of literature on it, but this is where we get into the reading disorders that are acquired, that we don't know the theories behind them as to why they happen. There's very little research on neglect of the right, let alone how that's going to impact your reading on the right. So we're just going to seep through some literature here and talk about it. All letter-by-letter readers, this is an acquired deficit. If you get left hemisphere damage, it tends to be kind of right about here. Sort of the temporal occipital, right around here. Almost every single case of letter-by-letter reading is from left hemisphere damage. If you can find a letter-by-letter reader from acquired brain damage where it's in the right, I really want to know about that. I have not found one yet. Some of these cases where every letter-by-letter reader has left hemisphere damage, they happen to look at the phonology, which is a good thing, which came out fine. You would imagine that if you're a letter-by-letter reader, which means you're going left to right, letter by letter by letter by letter, you're neglecting the right. Kind of makes sense, right? And some of these people, these are people that just can't, they call it purelexia because they can't read anymore. It's like, yep. Sorry.
I have a case, but unfortunately, it was a long time ago with my mother.
Oh.
She had a stroke on both her right and her left.
Oh, interesting.
Very, very different. My mother
Yeah.
had a prolific reader.
Yeah.
When she had the stroke on the right and was neglecting the left, she
Yeah.
no longer recognized for a while her hand as being
Yeah.
her hand,
Yeah.
her left side as being hers. And she thought she was fine because it affected her schema of her whole body. She kept thinking she was fine and could walk and tried to.
Aw.
Okay? It didn't really affect the reading much, but when it was the left hemisphere,
Interesting.
she suddenly went from a prolific reader down to a letter-by-letter reader.
Yeah.
And she also lost the ability to blend phonemes.
Okay, there's an example, yeah.
So it was
So in that case, it could actually be the phonology part, because left hemisphere is dominant in language, but it's also neglect, obviously, too.
the letter-by-letter
Yeah.
phonemes, because she would look at a word like Cicero. We lived on Cicero Avenue in Chicago.
Yeah.
And she would go C, I, and she'd
Yeah.
sound out the letters. Then she'd look back and then she'd
Yeah.
go
Yeah.
Oh, but she couldn't.
Interesting. That's exactly right. That's what they do. Letter by letter readers, they'll name them sometimes first. Sometimes they'll even name the letters. They'll go C, which suggests some kind of phonological something. C, I, O, and then they'll get the sound. Oh, S, K, I, O. Yeah, that's common too. I don't really get that. But obviously access to the language part is, yeah, that's very, very interesting. So anyway, she's saying her mother had a stroke in the left hemisphere, and once that happened, her reading went away entirely. Like this letter by letter reading here. It's correlated with word length, so the longer the word, the harder it is to read, which makes sense if you're going left to right. This just shows the areas that are damaged sometimes in letter by letter reading. Here's a pervasive developmental disorder case. This does not necessarily fall under the category of damage to the right hemisphere. I have no clue if this child even has damage or where it is. By pervasive developmental disorder, they're basically on the autistic spectrum, if that gives you an understanding. But they're not autistic and they're not Asperger's. They're just somewhere in the middle. The NOS stands for not otherwise specified. But basically, there's been some developmental problems from birth. Their non-word reading is great. This little girl, her non-word reading was great. She crammed everything to the left all the time. See how there's very few spaces in between the letters and the words? She's a left crammer. She's always on the left. When I had her do copying tasks on a line, like copy these letters, copy these numbers, looks just like this, right, all crammed on the left, and I'd say, no, let's spread it out on the page. Let's use the whole page. Once I said, let's use the whole page, she was cramming on the left side of the page. It's like whatever you think is the whole at the time, you see the neglect of that thing. It's either the left of the line, left of the page, yep.
So I have students that will only start in the middle of the page, no matter what kind of cue I give them to start, all the way over at the margin on the left. So
Yeah.
this could be that.
Yeah, absolutely. Neglect of the left. They're starting right in the middle because that's the left of what they see. That's a prime example.
Huh.
That's a prime example. Yeah. She was pretty little. I think she was about 6 at the time. Well, look at her writing. Maybe a little older. Maybe 7, 8.
Well, I have 5th graders.
She was little. I've been seeing her. I don't remember. I've been seeing her for a few years. I can't remember when we actually did that. But she might have been 7. Yeah.
Do you think in young children that the positioning of the paper, where you actually put the paper when the child wants to copy something or write something,
Is it important?
It can be. I mean,
Yeah.
all those strategies.
Right.
All the OT strategies. We've gone through everything. And
Yeah.
nothing we do has remediated where that child
Yeah.
starts on.
Yeah, this is where computer technology can be helpful because it can force someone to go to one side of the page by making things more salient and throwing things in, like throwing something in the visual field. Ooh, makes them look over there, Yeah. We'll talk about that.
can neglect be overcome at some point?
That's a really good question. The quick answer is yes. I mean, anyone who's had a parent or a grandparent that suffered a stroke and gone through this knows the answer is yes. To what extent? We don't really study the visual part as much as we do, obviously, the motor. It's more obvious. So people learn to walk again, they learn to talk again, they gain their face muscles back. The studies show that, yes, it gets better, but the patterns are still there. They're just not as strong. So, I don't know. We'll talk a bit about that. Was there another? Yeah.
What percentage of children do you think have this kind of problem?
That's a really good question. And I think one way to answer the question, and maybe teachers can lend insight into this, because, the more people that think this way or think about these things, we can help answer some of these questions. But the more kids that you would have that can't read non-words, but their phonology is fine, that's a good indicator. And I find it's pretty prominent. Andrew's a learning specialist. We want to take a stab at a percent? I don't know.
I don't know if there's been enough research yet.
There isn't enough research. If I were to guess, though, because I do clinical work and research, in kids with a reading problem, easy 50%.
Yeah, I think it's fairly
Easy
prominent.
half.
Just looking at the kids that I get.
Yeah.
I think it's a lot more prominent than.
Then we talk about. We like to think, I think it's sort of in North America, there's a phonology bandwagon. We think that everything's got to do with phonics. Other parts of the world don't really do that as much. But here it's very language dominant. But I would say probably 50, I'd guess 50%. Yeah. Yep.
Excuse
excuse me, in your practice, what do you use to diagnose this?
That's a really good question. We wish we'd put slides in for that, actually.
Oh.
If you want to diagnose a person with neglect, ideally, you want to have a computer program that flashes things. You want to have the line motion illusion test that I can give you. I can give you these things. But if you're a neuropsychologist, you just have over-the-table types of things. You want to do things like rapid naming. Did anyone, did anyone sit in Marianne Wolf? She's a rapid namer person. Funny the way I talk. But she likes the idea that it's a retrieval problem. In order to determine if you can't name things rapidly, if it's because of visual attention problem or a retrieval problem, you have to give word retrieval tests. So you want to say something like, tell me as many animal names you can think of in the next 60 seconds. You want tests that are normed for this, by the way, for their age, so you can tell whether this is normal or abnormal for their age. And then you want to give them rapid naming tasks. If they do poorly rapid naming tasks, like naming all the colors of these blocks, red, blue, green, like the Dallas-Kaplan, write that one down, Dallas-Kaplan executive function tasks, they have, it's called the, what's it called? Color word interference task. It's like a Stroop task. Anyone's heard of a Stroop task? CTOP has one? Apparently CTOP has one. Rapid naming tasks. You want to isolate word retrieval and the scanning part, going from one item to the next to the next to the next. If word retrieval is really great and rapid naming is way down, there's a sign. That's a good sign. What's that? We're 15 already? Oh my goodness. Okay, we're going to skip through. TMS, we can actually induce neglect in you and I. This is very interesting. So TMS is transcranial magnetic stimulation. So we can put a pulse on your right hemisphere or your left hemisphere, and we can create what's neglect of the opposite side of space, or even what's called extinction. So in the case of some dyslexics and forms of neglect, they'll actually know, oh, I knew that was a word, or I knew that was a fake word. In normals, if you give a pulse to their brain, they won't even know they saw anything. So they can actually create extinction, where you didn't see anything. There was nothing there. Now your mother who had the bilateral damage, you'll find this kind of interesting. So if you stimulate the right hemisphere, you can actually get neglect of the left, which means maybe you just saw part of it, or you didn't see it all, or you're over on the right a lot. But you can also just totally extinguish it, where, you know what, there was nothing there. I didn't see anything over there. And the converse, you stimulate the left hemisphere, and you think, there was nothing in the right. Didn't see anything there. But when you stimulate bilaterally, you see both. That's why, we talk about neglect being a spatial deficit. That's the timing piece. Do you understand? If you stimulate the right, and you can't see anything in the left hemisphere won. It's going to see over here on the right. It's like, I'm okay. So, you know what? Conscious attention is going to go to the part that's processed more quickly. So it's going to go to the right. The right was processed more quickly. So you get that one, right? And it happens for both sides. But when you stimulate both sides, you see both. They're not competing for time. Does that make sense? Everyone get that? So what happens is neglect, we talk about like a spatial deficit. It's also a deficit of time. How interesting is that? I find that very interesting. So single pulse TMS over the right temporal region leads to neglect or extinction, meaning I didn't see it, in the left side, and the vice versa for the other side. Actually, they tried the superior temporal gyrus in this particular study in the left, and it didn't create extinction or neglect in the right. If you want, there's only been, I think, 4 TMS studies done on adults on neglect, TMS stimulation, and I can give you all the references for them. But the 3, it didn't really still matter where it was, but this one, the left superior temporal gyrus, which is often an audiology spot. It's kind of the end of the line for the auditory system. That didn't work. Didn't create neglect of the right. Okay, simultaneous nausea. These are people that get bilateral damage like your mother did. And the question is, all right, you get damage on both sides. What happens to your visual attention? What happens to your reading? We already know when you make damage in normals and us, it's only temporary, by the way. If you ever participate in a TMS study, it just temporary lesions your brain for a few seconds, and then it all goes back to normal. We hope. It's probably the case. But people with bilateral damage, this is really scary. Simultaneous nausea, the name comes from seeing one object at a time. So So what happens is when you get damage on both sides, you only see one thing. In a word, that would be seeing the middle of the word, or only reading very, very short words. In people, it means looking at a bowl of fruit and only seeing a banana. How scary is that? These people only see one object at a time. This is an example, though, where I want to say how we can take these interesting case studies and we can think about the phenomenon of neglect. Does this apply? People don't talk about neglect in terms of simultaneous nausea. They just think, oh, it's a one object at a time disorder. But when you think about it, when you think about it with the TMS studies and the acquired neglect studies and the stroke cases, it makes sense. It makes sense. They're not attending to the periphery. They're attending to the foveal fixation, which is processed bilaterally. They see one thing at a time. This is a case of a 10-year-old. You can see there's damage in the parietal region on both sides of the brain. This person can only read short words. Just like the simultaneous nausea can only see one object at a time, this child, 10 years old, can only see short words. That, again, would sort of be in support of a theory of hemifield neglect being applied to this case and many other cases. Can only read short words, difficulty shifting attention to new words, kind of like simultaneous nausea, right? He's only seeing one object at a time. You can't move to a new word, just like you can't move to a new object. You can only see that one word, short one at that. Difficulty copying from the blackboard, poor scanning and motion perception, a lot of things. And by the way, a lot of these things happen in developmental dyslexics all the time. We could have a whole other talk on motion perception problems in dyslexics, contrast sensitivity, all kinds of things that fit these acquired cases. And you know what? If you're a dyslexic, right, and there's no notable evidence of brain damage, you were just sort of born that way, maybe your right hemisphere was oversized. Maybe you have deficit planum temporal in the right hemisphere. We know that that's true in a lot of developmental dyslexics. There's something up. It doesn't have to be a stroke. It could just be that something's bigger. It takes longer. It takes longer to go through the right hemisphere, so you're going to neglect the left a little more than the right. That's that timing thing, right? Just like in the TMS studies. So right hemisphere damage leads to left neglect and poor nonword reading. Left hemisphere damage leads to right neglect, letter by letter reading, if we want to call that right neglect. And I would argue that that probably is. Bilateral damage, you have problems reading long words. You like the short words. And difficulty fixating to new words. I see people writing. Maybe I should leave this one on a little longer. Okay. I'm going to be switching to Andrea soon. She's the, what are we going to do about this person? Just to try to close off. So what have we learned? We learned about neglect. It's not modular, meaning there's no one place for it. There's a lot of different places for it, which sort of falls in the lap of the timing issue as opposed to the place issue. It's how quickly can your hemisphere process that side of space. It's not insurmountable. That was your question. We can get over it. It sounds silly, but you take a person with a stroke and they look at something, they only see one side, and you just touch them. You say, hey, look over there, look over there, and they see it. It's not like they can't get over this. They can. It's just they're on autopilot, and it's how do we get the brain off of autopilot? One way, if you think about it, if we know there's damage in one side of the brain, and we know when you stimulate bilaterally there's no neglect, what if we could stimulate one side of the brain so it synchronizes things? How cool would that be? Wouldn't that be neat? So it's not just spatial, it's timing too. Spatial neglect is also a facet of time. And I'm probably going to stop there because we are running out of time, but I'll just say one more thing because I think it's important. The dyslexia research in developmentally in kids, we've been on this, we call it, has anyone heard of temporal processing? Yeah. Paula Talal? Right. We're on this bandwagon, right? It's been a couple decades now. There's a temporal processing deficit. What does that mean? I was in that bank. I'm still there. This is a study that we did. This is called the Turnus. You guys ever seen this Turnus thing? See these squares? You can't see this illusion where you're sitting, but when this is presented to you pretty close to your face at a certain distance, that last square, see how it moves front and back? That will change your perception of whether you see 3 squares moving or 1 square jumping. You can't see it from where you are, but it's an illusion. It happens in everybody. And the speed in which I just screwed that one up. The speed in which I take you from here to here, the speed in which I flick these squares on and off, If I do it really quickly, phonological dyslexics, the poor non-readers, they don't see one jumping. They just keep seeing 3 moving forever. This theory of neglect can explain that. We used to explain it, and we did when we published this study. We explained it from a magnocellular deficit. Does everyone know what that is? The theory of these temporal processing deficits, whether it's polytalal, and the theories are, by the way, when you present sounds really quickly, maybe you don't hear all those sounds because dyslexics can't hear that quickly. And there are cells in the brain that turn on and off really quickly. So when you do things fast, these cells are capable of figuring that out. Oh, I saw it come on and off really fast. Oh, I heard it go on and off really fast. There are cells in the brain in developmental dyslexics, and we know they're not right. Those cells aren't right. So we've called it a magnocellular deficit, which means a deficit to the big cells, magno, big. And we explain temporal processing deficits from that standpoint. I would argue that this phenomenon of neglect can also explain the same phenomena that magnocellular theory can explain, and that in fact, they're not exclusives of each other. The way the magnocellular system works can be explained with neglect. They're sort of one and the same. But one I want to show you just before, because I think people will find this interesting, because I know phonology is a big thing, right? People, and there are a lot of dyslexics with phonological problems. There really are. There's probably about the same in both camps. This is some brain imaging study that we did, looking at polytalal's work. So what she does is she presents tones quickly in succession to see if you can determine whether you heard both or not. The argument is that a lot of kids with phonological problems, they can't hear all those tones because their cells can't turn on enough quickly to hear them. Just like in motion, same thing. You can't see motion because your cells can't rejuvenate quickly to see things move. So what do? We took tones and we presented them to people's ears. Where you see this big blip, it's called the M100. So you present a tone, 100 milliseconds later you get a blip in the auditory cortex. It means, oh, I heard something. Okay? Here's a good reader, two tones, 200 milliseconds apart. You see the M100, so there's a 100 millisecond wait. Then you see activity, which looks like, oh, I heard that first tone. 200 millisecond passes, because that's the time before the next tone, and you see another blip, right? This is a person that hears 2 tones in their auditory cortex. What happens when we take a poor reader? Here's 2 tones presented. You only see the first tone. You don't see the second tone. You get 1 peak of activation in the auditory cortex in the dyslexic. 200 milliseconds later, there's nothing. This matches their behavioral data, by the way. They tell you whether they heard it or not, and it matches. Okay, now this is important. Everyone say ba, ba. Now say pa, pa. You don't say pa. You just say it in early word. Ba, pa. When you say ba, there's a release of air, b, and then there's this voice. Ah. It's called place of articulation, and then voice onset. Ah, ba. They happen only 20 milliseconds apart. The brain can't hear the difference. That's why right here this person is listening to ba and you see 1 peak. When you say pa, there's 60 milliseconds between p and ah. The brain hears the difference. Right here in this picture you can see the first blip is the p. Exactly 60 milliseconds later you see the ah. So the acoustic properties of the stimuli are exactly matched by this brain activity, making the MEG an amazing tool to pick up on these temporal kinds of things, right? Okay, this is a normal good reader. Let's look at the dyslexic. Ba. There's hardly a bump. There's still a peak, and there is 1, but it's smaller. Pa. Right. They can't tell the difference between ba's and pa's. This is, I don't say they, some of them. With phonological-based problems. And the behavioral data matches g versus k, d versus t, b versus p. These are all referred to as an auditory temporal processing problem because not only do they not hear all kinds of tones that are in succession, but when speech sounds change really quickly, they don't always hear them all. So anyway, we talk about this as a temporal processing deficit. And there's evidence for this. There are cells in the auditory system that turn on and off to things that happen quickly, and if they can't do that, you're not going to perceive them right. So there is evidence for this temporal processing deficit in dyslexics, in auditory and in vision, and some people would argue that in vision, the temporal processing wouldn't necessarily be some kind of hemispatial neglect thing. It would be the fact that these cells can't turn on and off very quickly, so you're not going to see motion. But maybe they're related. Who's to say they're not related? And they probably are. Because when you look at the tasks that we use to tap into magnocellular, like the Turner's task with the squares, how different is that from the line motion illusion task? That used for neglect. Not that different. So they're not necessarily mutually exclusive from one another. I'm going to bring Andrew to the stand. We have some handouts that talk about, right here, this is what do you do if there's neglect? How can you get over neglect? The next few slides that Andrew's going to go over too are all the computer programs that are available today to get over different types of reading problems that make it easier than the traditional methods. Some of them are really fun. These ones are specifically for neglect. Luminance changes in different sides of space can alleviate neglect, believe it or not. Making rightmost or leftmost letters more salient, so they just sort of pop out. Video games, believe it or not. Video games enhance your visual attention, your ability to focus and move around. Prism adaptation gets rid of neglect. Inacquired. I don't know about developmental. It's never been done. Using prisms can actually alleviate neglect. And this is one we talked about, TMS. What if we knew where the brain damage was, or we knew which side of the brain was more sluggish, and what if we stimulated the opposite side? Would they become in sync with each other? Sort of a question. Following along with your finger, marking the center of the page with a dot, practicing shifting attention quickly across the hemifield space. And now, Andrea. Let me give you this.
Thank you. Okay, so as technologies develop, so do the ways that we can help teach kids to read. Of course, the traditional face-to-face methods remain critical, but an ever-expanding set of tools are now available to us to enhance the more traditional reading strategies. Technology-based remediation can also be a powerful way for students to get effective practice at home. And I'd just like to share a sampling of some technology-based remediations available for you to use with your students to address different areas in reading.
And there will be handouts, by the way, if you want them.
We have a handout that has all the information, so don't feel like if there's something you're interested in, you need to copy that down. There's an annotated handout that goes into more description. Some programs that deal with phonological awareness, increasing that, are aerobics and fast-forward language, and they are game-based computer games.
Fast-forward language would be good for kids with auditory temporal processing problems. It presents speech sounds really slowly, and it stretches out the formants so they can hear the difference. We tested this with brain imaging and over time to see how the kids did, and we found that their phonemic awareness greatly improved. We looked at the brain activity before and after. What we didn't look at was whether their reading improved, but that would probably come next, which would have been later. But it did work in improving their phonemic awareness. So, they'll take a ba and they'll be like, ba. Like they learn to hear those sounds.
It goes back to the basic elements of the tones and the sounds in words. It's kind of pre-even letter. Things to deal with some programs. These are also computer-based, game-based programs that address more phonics-based issues, Lexia reading, and My Reading Coach, and they are pretty consistent with the Orton-Gillingham approach as well. For reading fluency, Read Naturally is audio CD-based or computer-based, and you're applying the repeated reading method to help improve reading fluency, which then in turn improves reading comprehension. You're reading stories for that one. For Tune Into Reading, this is a newer one that I haven't actually used but sounds really interesting. You use the same theory of repeated readings, but it's to song lyrics, and you begin by reading and then you end up singing the song as well. So it sounds like that could be a lot of fun for kids as well. Both of these look at before and after practice for kids. They kind of graph their progress, and that can be very motivating for them also. There are quite a few resources out there for text-to-speech for kids who struggle with reading to help them get more access to print. And also if they read along while they're listening to it, it can help increase fluency. Recording for the Blind and Dyslexic in Massachusetts, there is a grant. Any public school can get a free subscription to them, and I put information about that in the handout. And there's also something going on until January where you can get a free individual membership. And this is to get CDs to listen to. They have a library of over about 60,000 texts. And you can do it on a special CD player, or there's computer-based software to use as well. Bookshare is something similar, but it's all computer-based, and right now with a qualifying disability, you can also get a free account for this. There's software you put on your computer, and you upload different books, and they're books that kids are just traditionally reading in school. They're popular books, and it will read it along and highlight the word as it reads it, and you can change in both of these the rate of speed so that the kids can visually follow along. You can slow it down or speed it up. And Awesome Talking Library does something similar, but for web pages, and when you install this program, it will read aloud text that you select on any web page, so it kind of opens up the access of the internet to kids. And Word Talk does a similar thing for text in Microsoft Word. It's a free thing that you can download that will read aloud to you the text in Microsoft Word. Some of these are kind of fun online read-alouds. Storyline Online is actually put on by the Screen Actors Guild, and prominent actors and actresses read popular children's books. And it shows them reading, but it also shows the text in the book and the illustrations as well. So it can be a great way for kids to get more access to hearing more stories, to hear fluent readers, and to be able to read along with it. And Reading Planet Book Zone also has stories. Some of theirs, I think, are more stories they've created. They have some more traditional ones like The Tale of Peter Rabbit that they have as well. But it's all web-based. And finally, these are just a few free web-based reading games that address a variety of issues in reading, but that are things that kids could maybe practice at home or do independent practice after they've had the instruction from a teacher, and these are in game formats. So we have copies of those here, and I'm going to pass you back to Laurie in case you have any questions. Thank you.
So you might have questions. Reading's a really big field, and everyone's got different interests. And so if you want to take the floor, grab a mic, shout out any question. We're the last one, so this is good. We can chat. Yeah.
I want to make sure that I have it clear about the timing. In other words,
Yeah.
as the brain is reading, the side that's undamaged has the edge.
It wins. Yeah. It wins for conscious attention. Yeah. So the question was, the side of the brain that's not damaged, so if the left hemisphere is not damaged, then the right hemisphere is probably going to win. It's going to be processed more efficiently, more quickly, which is where you'll tend to send your conscious attention. Right? I hope there's enough for everybody. If there's not, we'll just email me or call and we'll send you more. Yeah, let's do that.
Laurie, if there's not enough, I take a copy to the...
Oh, you're so sweet. Oh, that'd be great. That'd be really great. Do you want one? Because it looks like we're almost out.
Just one handout, yep.
Yeah.
And have you discovered ways to, when a child's only writing on the right side of the page?
That's a really good question. I haven't the question was, have I ever met a child that likes to write on the right side of the page? I don't know if I have.
I mean, have you developed techniques to bring them
Oh, to bring them over.
to start?
Yeah, we'll just...
And then after you walk
Right. They usually, developmentally, they usually get it over on their own, but you can...
It's a lot of practice.
It's a lot of practice. let the methods that let me flip back.
I think it's definitely a field that needs to be explored more too. I think that we have some ideas of what might work.
Yeah.
Right.
This is why
But I think
computers
it's an
are a good
area
idea
that we see
because...
that this is more impacting kids, that hopefully we can come up with some more.
Yeah. No, people don't even talk about this stuff. So
Yeah.
we're it, you know. The question is, what do we do about this?
Right.
And I guess those are some suggestions.
Okay.
Whether they're going to work or not, I'd really like you to let me know. I don't know.
3, 4,
Yeah.
5, 6, 7, 8,
Maybe 20 or so.
yeah, 20 or 30 maybe.
Good.
Can I ask you off mic about
Yeah.
off mic about your son, my son?
Oh, yeah.
I'm Noel Gunter, who's reading
Hi.
off this project.
Oh, okay, nice to meet you.
The project. That teaching history and helping kids who struggle. So especially I'm involved with this. I'm a freshman at my son. Do you have 5 minutes? Can I wait till the end?
Absolutely. If we have, why don't we wait in case there's general questions? Absolutely. But yeah, happy to. Yeah.
The student I was talking about, where, because the first thing you always want to do is get rid of biological issues, or physical issues. Right?
Yeah.
Problem with him is he's got tactile issues and attention issues. They want to, they want to rule out vision first. Because one of the first things we thought is it might do vision. Do you have any ideas on how to help a visual the optometrist or ophthalmologist evaluate his vision.
Okay, the question is, I think the question is, what can ophthalmologists and optometrists, those types of people, do to test for these visual types of problems?
Or even just his visual acuity.
Yeah, okay, this is the answer to that question. You want to rule out a visual problem. It's not always brain-based. Okay? It's not always brain-based. In fact, stereoptic vision, if you have a problem with stereoptic vision, it can look like neglect. So in other words, like when you hold your finger in front of your nose like this, you close one eye and you look at it, and the other one, it moves, right?
Yeah.
So that's stereoptic vision. It's kind of off. But you can imagine if your stereoptic was off like that, it would make the letters move on the page too. It would make it appear more to the right or more to the left, just like your finger would when you do that. Yeah. So you need to rule out a stereoptic vision problem. Absolutely. What usually happens is when you send these kids to get their vision tested, they come back saying they have ocular motor dysfunction, which basically means they think their muscles are weak, which they can never test for, which is the same as saying it's a brain-based problem, probably. You can't tell sometimes whether it's eye-based or brain-based. The only thing you can rule out is like stereoptic or something that's strong like that. But often we're left to think, I don't know if it's visual or if it's brain. I'm a brain person. I tend to think it's brain. A visual person is going to think, I think it's ocular motor. It's probably the muscles. Sometimes you just can't tell. But that's the one thing you need to rule out is stereoptic for sure. Stereoptic vision problem.
Specifically for that.
Yeah, and they'll look at tracking and they'll say, look, the tracking's off. It must be ocular motor dysfunction. That's usually what they say. Yeah.
But part of that too is inattention.
But you definitely have to rule out an eye-based problem. That's a really good point. You have to do that. Yeah. Yeah.
I got a place to
These
go.
remediation programs I teach at the college level. Were any of them appropriate? Because fast forward the last time, they only had ones like middle school.
I wouldn't even recommend that for an adult. It's boring and they'd fall asleep and they develop strategies by then to get over it.
Lexia has a couple different versions for different age ranges.
I mean, my kids are at middle school developmental.
Oh, okay.
You know, because I teach developmental at the college level.
Well, that might work.
Probably at a middle school reading level.
Right.
They're not going to do it.
It's boring.
Right, no, not if it's for...
Nor would my school pay for it.
Right,
Yeah.
not if it's for elementary school students, but there's a lot of those programs...
There's a karaoke one that's in the list. A karaoke reading program. That they would probably find fun.
Which one was that?
That was their...
That's,
what was it, Read Into? Tune Into Reading?
Tune Into Reading.
Read that
Karaoke,
done for
sort
any
of.
ages.
A little more than
I
that,
don't think
but
there's
exaggerated.
really an age kind of stigma with that one. Any of the text-to-speech ones.
You know what? Yeah.
And aerobics has an adult.
Do they have
Aerobics?
That's the name of
Oh, yeah.
psychological
Okay, aerobics.
Interesting.
Yeah, just for the sounds.
What kind of...
I see.
Yeah, it's about what you look
I just put Kurzweil for Felician College. Was that honey? Kurzweil, which does
Are there questions that we can share with the group? There's a couple people that would like private questions.
Other doctors being able to diagnose it. So if you go through like
Is that somebody's name?
doctor or new background, that's where I'm
probably
from, would they
was.
be able to identify
Kurzweil,
this? Would
just-
they be
What kind of doctor?
like neurologist?
No, neurologist, no.
Does it sound
No, a neuropsychologist maybe. A neuropsychologist who specializes in reading. Yeah, go to university labs over clinics. Yeah, yeah.
an organizational component. Okay.
There's that lack of communication still, right, between science and application.
Okay. But the other thing
Yeah.
is it comes with USB ports. So
Okay.
the students could take it home.
Okay.
Once they scanned it in at the college.
Okay.
That's. I love that question.
They could take it home. Anything that was scanned in or any book, they could practice.
Okay, so it's called...
It's an amazing question.
If you look up Kurzweil,
Rachel's question was, does it change? Does neglect, is it stronger or lesser or worse? And
technology.
I don't know. And my guess is yes. Right? There's one study I didn't mention that is really neat.
So, and we're...
They induced hemifield neglect in cats. I know I hate animal studies. Trust me, I'm the biggest animal lover in the world. But,
That must be interesting.
oh no, not that part. I hate animal studies. I'm an animal advocate.
So am I, but can you imagine just doing that?
I know, but that's awful. But what they found was they actually stopped the neglect by injecting a NMDA receptor antagonist, which is responsible for processing glutamate. So diet probably has an effect on the brain and hemifield neglect. And the other interesting thing about that study, it's new too, it's very, very new, is that what they did was they created damage in the visual cortex, both sides. The damage would create the neglect in the cats. They would inject the antagonist for NMDA just prior to the lesion, and when they did that, there was no neglect. It's almost like this, if the cells are damaged, it's not the damage, it's the toxicity from the glutamate that gets into the cells that makes the neglect in that case. But you wonder about diet. If your brain is just, like, if you go through a Lyme disease or you get some kind of neurological infection or insult, your brain is more susceptible to these kinds of things. Because then diet's going to be important and what you ingest because the cells are fragile.
I think to improve.
Yeah. But if your cells are strong, it probably won't affect them.
Because I knew Read 180, but I don't know that it addresses disability.
Well, I think it depends on, it's so hard to say depending on what, like it sounds like you have such a broad population.
Oh, we do.
Do you have trouble with kids accessing text?
That's interesting. Yeah.
I'm a huge,
you name it.
I've had
Right. I really feel like diet is important, all those things.
Who want to love to read.
Can we do the individual ones after? Sorry, guys. No, it's just a little close to the mic. That's all.
Sorry, hon.
It's okay. Yeah. Yeah, there is a slide in here, and there was just so much of it, I skipped through it. Good question. The question is, what about kids with ADHD? There's a test that's available. It's cheap, too. Are you a teacher?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, you guys should get this, because it's kind of interesting. You can get this test. It's called the IVA-CPT. IVA-CPT stands for Interstimulus Visual Auditory IVA Continuous Performance Test. Anyway, it's long. It's called the IVA-CPT. Yeah, if you look IVA space CPT online, you'll get it. There's one now that's a plus version, but it's basically it's an attention test. It comes up with 12 different measures of attention. It's very boring, very awful. It's 15, 20 minutes long. It's kind of designed to be boring to see if kids can hold their attention that long. But it's very just response-oriented, which means memory doesn't come into play, executive function, just all attention, And they found that certain measures on that task, alertness and steadiness being two, were highly correlated with left neglect. Which is interesting. So I just found that recently. I'm going to use that because I use that test. I thought, I can use this in my lab or in the clinic. So yeah, they're ADHD. People that don't perform well on that test are usually diagnosed with ADHD. It's a great test to do and have. The other thing that's good about having it in a school too is when kids go on medication, or sometimes they do for this stuff, if you test them before and after on this thing, you can determine whether the medication is working. Because this test is so easy to do, it's very response-oriented. It's not like there's no learning or practice effect.
Right.
So when you do it over and over again, you always get the same score. But when you go on medication and the scores go up, you know it was from the medication. So it would be really great for schools to have this type of test. You can test kids 3-4 times throughout the year. You can tell if the tension's going up or down and what it's correlated with. And apparently alertness and steadiness on that particular test are highly correlated with left neglect in children. Yeah.
Because I also have a student in my class that is ADHD, very ADHD, very bright, but terrible physical writer.
Yeah.
And he has the same type of thing. Can't stay on the line, starts over, And so that would be good to see too and stuff,
If anyone has interesting case studies you want to throw my way, just email me or talk about them now.
I gave it to the help desk, so there'll be 30 copies.
Oh, good. Tomorrow. He's writing it down. Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to show you this slide, but we talked about it, so I'm just going to go to the end here. Any other questions, for the group? Yep.
In terms of the field itself,
yeah.
I obviously myself am a reading specialist, and I've been really I'm trying to figure out where I'm going to go to get my PhD. This is a lot of what I'm really kind of obsessed with, in addition to how the brain processes text and metacognition. Do you have suggestions for what kind of I don't want to go to medical school.
Right.
And reading curriculum in the education department for PhD is nothing to do with this. Would it be experimental psychology and then kind of
Yep. What I ended up doing was there's a lot of good people in this area, so you're in a great spot. I mean, A lot of good scientists around here. I mean, what I did was I did my doctorate in Australia with Max Coulthart, who's the dual root guy, and then and I did some clinical work sort of on the side to get that clinical neuropsych stuff down. And then I moved to Boston, and I worked with Albert Galaberta, who does the neuroanatomical part of it. You could work with, what's that guy's name? Alfonso Karamazza. He's a neglect guy. He's over at Harvard in psychology.
I'm in Cleveland. So I would find
Oh, you're in Cleveland. Okay, you'd stay local. The type of program, if you were interested, yeah, I would do you want to do clinical work or just research?
I would prefer to do research.
Okay, then go the experimental way. Yeah. What I ended up doing is I did experimental, and then I went back off the neuropsych designation so I could do the clinical too. It depends what you like to do. Definitely go experimental. Just choose someone that... Thank you so much, Andrea, by the way. Thank you so much. Yeah, go with an experimental person either in reading or dyslexia or a facet of it that you're interested in, because then you can learn that thing so well. So, for example, if you're interested in the audition part, you can study under James Jerger. He's like the Einstein of audiology. You could learn the audiology system so well that now you can apply that to reading. You know, you don't have to stick with a reading person.
Right.
In fact, I would tell you to go with someone who's a little offbeat from reading, so you're bringing something new to the table.
Right.
You know, so yeah, maybe audiology, maybe vision, you know, whatever.
And then as far as after you finish your PhD in the field, I wouldn't probably go back to being in the classroom anymore. So,
You probably wouldn't want to because you'll find it really
if
interesting.
I wasn't in academia,
What could you do?
are there a lot of, I know it's all up and coming in here and there. So.
Yeah. Well, what I ended up doing was I took radiology as a postdoc. You can be a scientist. You can do neuroimaging studies. You can run labs. You can study this stuff as a scientist. You could become a reading specialist and advise people. You could develop programs. How cool? Yeah, that'd be great. Work with a computer science person. That'd be great. Yeah, a lot of things. Mass General has Pam Hook. She develops one of these programs in here. She's at Mass General. She's a scientist. She develops reading programs. There's an example. Gabriele has a lab. They do clinical evaluations plus research. There's, you can sort of... Yeah, you're welcome. Oh, okay. I'll take this off now. Thank you.